Hello and welcome to Reality Check. Hi, I'm Mark Pellegrino, and today I'm going to talk about Israel. Israel has been haunting the geopolitical world since it burst onto the scene by peaceful UN resolution in 1948. If you don't know what happened next, basically it went something like this. United Arab States attacked the newborn Jewish state in an attempt to exterminate it right out of the womb. They failed, and their aggression ended in a stalemate. And this cycle of aggression to stalemate has continued for decades. Through these decades, claims against Israel mounted. They dispossessed the Palestinians of their property. They'd essentially created an ethnic state hostile to the indigenous population. They're a colonial occupying force, and finally, they've been committing systematic genocide. Unfortunately, the fact that none of these accusations is true doesn't matter to the from the river to the sea people at all. Don't believe me? Just try going down that list with an apologist for Palestinian statism, and you'll feel exactly like this guy. Frustrated? Yeah, me too. You see, it's the failure on the part of pretty much everyone except objectivists to unite the nutty particulars of this conflict by principles that makes it seem like an unsolvable riddle. A Gordian-knotted diplomatic nightmare. But what principle can possibly be applied to this crazy situation that'll make the fuzzy picture clearer? The principle of legitimate statehood. What makes a state legitimate or illegitimate? That is the question, and that is certainly the question at the base of this conflict. But to answer it, we should know what a state is and what we mean by legitimate. At its core, a state is a political legal entity that encompasses a geographical area governed by specific legal and political customs. In the past, states were formed and reformed by conquest. With each conquest, new laws and customs shaped the state's identities and political trajectories. So even though states, such as they were really just chess pieces in a geopolitical game lorded over by kings, queens, and their aristocratic minions, their legitimacy at the time rested in the fact that one side subdued another. In the past, physical power determined legitimacy. States were essentially a means of acquiring wealth, prestige, power, and resources. The people living on the margins in those places mattered very little and simply had to go with a political flow that was very much out of their hands. The territory encompassing Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank had a similar history. The land, called Judea and Samaria, was conquered by the Romans. The Romans were conquered by the Arabs by the Turks, and so a largely unoccupied and unproductive wasteland called Palestine, never an actual state after Judea, Samaria, passed from one empire to another while the people living there, Jews and Arabs alike, became the subjects of the new leaders and to their laws and customs. Such was the typical and violent story of how states were legitimately formed and reformed over the ages, until the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was the age of applied reason, which challenged the traditional narrative of the conquest state, essentially redefining legitimacy away from the age-old might makes right to the new and revolutionary right makes might. That's correct. The discovery of the social moral principle of rights was one of the greatest achievements of the Enlightenment, and it changed our understanding of the proper relationship between the state and the people. From the Enlightenment on, any state that did not abide by the social moral principle of rights, which constrained the power of the state so that men could be free to act in their own interests, was not legitimate. The logic being that no state could claim a right to exist that did not also respect the rights of its own citizens. That means that in the present, rights determine legitimacy, and so it follows that the legitimacy of a state should be measured by the degree to which it fulfills this moral ideal. If a state does not, men have the power to alter or abolish it from within or without. So with this standard in mind, how does Israel measure up in comparison to its neighbors, and most specifically the quasi-states of Gaza and the West Bank? Let's see. The Palestinians claim a state while practicing brutal authoritarian violence against their own citizens and the people of Israel. Far from a declaration of principled rights, their governing charters are embedded with genocidal violence justified by religious fanaticism. In Gaza, the right to vote has been suspended, and the people either serve a state-sanctioned nationalist movement or risk death. The Palestinian Authority also makes no official claims that individual rights animate their government, choosing as well a violent identity with nationalist aspirations. Even more broadly, no other state in the region recognizes the enlightened view of government as of, for, and by the people, and instead are simply iterations of monarchy and dictatorship whose moral philosophy looks to a brutal 7th century code of laws that promote slavery, religious intolerance, and disproportionate punishment for crimes as their moral guide. In short, every Western moral norm has been rejected by every state in the Middle East but one: Israel. This doesn't mean Israel is perfect, no state is, but their rights respecting principles like the right of political dissent, freedom of speech, religious tolerance, due process, the predominance of secular law over the whims of men make it the only legitimate state in that region and certainly ranks it amongst the world's great modern democracies. So by the Enlightenment standard that right makes might, Israel is the only legitimate state in the Middle East and the only one entitled to defend itself against the inherent aggression of every authoritarian regime around it. No authoritarian regime and no people accepting the premises of such a regime can make any justifiable claims to anything, even if one of their claims is indigenousness. It is the establishment and implementation of rights that justifies a claim to rights, and nothing else. To the Palestinian people, I say, learn that lesson. Throw off the brutal regimes animated by hate, prejudice, and nationalism, otherwise known as Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, and embrace the modern world of liberty, trade, and happiness, or suffer the dark age consequences of rejecting them. Check. Hi everybody, if you find this content interesting, please don't hesitate to hit the like or subscribe button, and please follow the link below for a free download of the book that changed my life. I know it can change yours too. Have a great day. Peace.